All right, we're live. I'm here with Peter Lavelle in Moscow, host of RT's Crosstalk, and Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, based out of London. Can you guys hear me? Peter, Alexander, you want to say hello and see if the viewers hear us?
Well, hello, and delighted to be with you, and I hope you can hear me.
This is turning into a wonderful tradition. Hopefully we'll be able to do it more often.
Yeah.
It's like Sunday football, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah. It's fantasy politics. Okay.
It's fantasy politics. So do you guys hear us all right? If you do, just let us know in the chat. Great. Thank you, Henry. Henry says we can hear you. Pac says loud and clear. All right, guys, let's get into it. Let's just go into it right away. Saudi Arabia, Trump, 60 Minutes. Peter, we just did a crosstalk covering this. What are your thoughts?
Well, we need to know a whole lot more. One thing is for sure is that Khashoggi, he was a dissident, but based on dissident standards, he's pretty mild. But it shows that the Riyadh regime is completely intolerant. A lot of this, how we move forward and understand it, is how Erdogan is going to play this. As we said earlier on Crosstalk, which everyone will be able to watch in a few hours, the Saudis and the Turks have created a investigation team, which, reading between the lines, that means it's a negotiating team, and it's how much the Saudis are going to have to cough up in cash and strategy and in reputation. This is a catastrophe, folks. And of course, Trump's enemies are taking full advantage of it, because Trump is between a rock and a hard place on this one. And then I suggest everybody look at John Brennan's article. I think it was in the Washington Post. I mean, talk about an unrepenting warmonger, okay? Oh my goodness. Okay, maybe put it in as a link, Alexander Christoforou, because it's extraordinary. Let's see what unfolds in the next couple of days. It is not impossible. The Crown Prince's job is on the line, okay? I mean, his nominal control of the kingdom has been an unmitigated disaster. And he's shown himself to be very erratic, unreliable, and a lot of people around him are saying enough is enough. And this is the kind of reputational damage that's almost impossible to recover from. So we'll be talking about this next week.
Alexander, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I agree with much of what Peter says. I would add, where it comes to Trump being between a rock and a hard place, that of course for Trump at this moment in time, one of the key things is the price of oil. Oil has been rising. He doesn't want it to go on rising. He wants friendly, stable Saudi Arabia. He does not want, it seems to me, a big argument with the Saudis at this time. But that's what he's got. That's what he's landed himself into. The Saudis from their side will obviously not want to rock the boat too much with the US. So I suspect there will be lots of phone calls underway at this moment in time between Washington and Riyadh. And I have to say, I agree again with Peter. I wonder whether Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, let's call him, whether he's going to be around for much longer, because he's caused so much trouble. He's been such a major embarrassment, both for the US and for the Saudi royal family, and he's got so many enemies in Saudi Arabia as a result of the things he's done there. So I
was just going to say, for our viewers, if you want to see how PR is used, I mean, the Crown Prince was in the United States a few months ago, and the tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars that were paid to paint him as a reformer, as a visionary, it was all paid for, and people were paid off, okay? It was a disgusting display of just moral corruption.
Absolutely. And amazing that people nonetheless fell for it to the extent that
they just take the money. These people have no morals. They have no moral compass. Money. That's the only thing they care about.
Yeah. Peter, you mentioned in Crosstalk that you actually had him as a guest at one point. Are you allowed to talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was Anya, my editor, that actually reminded me that he had been on the program. And so I went back and I took a look at it. And that's why I opened up with I prefaced my remarks by, if he's a dissident, I mean, a pretty mild one at that, okay? But even that is intolerable for this Wahhabi regime. Intolerable. I think we can broadly assume that the Saudi government had him assassinated. I think we broadly can assume that he hasn't shown up. But what a cardinal idiotic mistake. I mean, Khashoggi was a dissident. I mean, that was a gift to Riyadh, saying, well, we tolerate dissent. He's a Saudi citizen. I mean, you don't do this kind of stuff. It's silly. There's no upside to this at all, okay? Now, as somebody said in the question, is there some kind of intrigues? I wouldn't put a lot of people past that, okay? But as we usually on these podcasts, I don't like to wander off the reservation too much until we have facts. We're responsible, and we're responsible to our viewers here. I'm not going to go out on the limb and say, it's the CIA doing this. Maybe it is, but we don't know. So we're going to leave it at that.
Alexander, when do you think we're going to get some more clarity on this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's supposed to be this film or video recording or sound recording of the murder being carried out. Supposedly, what they're now saying that it was all recorded by Khashoggi's Apple phone. So, I mean, if that comes out and if it's true, it may be very, very difficult to suppress a story about that, and it could be that we will get some clarity as to how the murder was carried out. As to the question of why the murder was carried out, if he was murdered, then I'm not so sure, because, as I said, that will probably lead up to so many important people in Saudi Arabia and will result in so many difficult questions that I suspect the Saudis will want to close ranks on that one.
Oh, but I think what will happen, I mean, the opposite could happen, is that bin Salman, he's going to have his hand caught in the cookie jar, as it were. Of course, he'll say he knew nothing about it, but everybody that does know about it, gone. Okay, and it will be another step in his power grab of really strengthening it, and that is going to send a reign of terror through his own intelligence community. You don't do that. You don't piss off everybody at the same time, and this is exactly what this guy is doing.
Well, exactly. Can I just make a point about that? Because, I mean, again, Peter's absolutely right. We should not speculate too far. But I suspect that if you really want an explanation of why Khashoggi was killed, it suggests to me that MBS's position within Saudi Arabia may not be very strong, that he's concerned, he's cracking down on dissent from all sides because he feels that there is a critical mass of people already within Saudi Arabia who don't like him. And that's what makes him overreact to, and Peter's right, this incredibly mild criticism from a person who went out of his way to insist his loyalty to the Saudi royal family and to the country. So, you know, if we're looking at an already fragile position on the part of MBS, then this could unravel it even further. Now, as I said, that's to some extent some guesswork there, but I think it's informed guesswork, and we need to watch this very carefully. But to have the whole story come out so that we know exactly what happened, well, I'm skeptical we'll ever get there.
Alexander, we have a question from Pax Bella. Can you comment a bit on Theresa May?
What to say about Theresa May? we are as I am speaking now. I was just a few minutes ago reading the British newspapers. It's the never-ending psychodrama. I mean, she apparently told the EU leaders a few days ago that she would actually keep Britain indefinitely in the customs union of the EU. Now, this is what she absolutely said she wouldn't do. So now we're hearing about all sorts of rebellions going on within the Conservative Party. 10 cabinet ministers supposedly are about to resign. A British government minister is flying to Brussels to negotiate. I am getting very bored with this story of Theresa May. I mean, it seems to me that the real problem is that if the Conservative Party cannot get its act together to get rid of this obviously useless Prime Minister, then really what good is it? what purpose does it serve anymore? And frankly, I'm almost getting to the point now where I'd say anybody was better than Theresa May. I haven't quite got there. I still draw the line at Boris Johnson, but you know,
well, at least Boris Johnson entertains us.
Well, I know. Well, that's
can't even dance. That was, oh my God, that was political pornography. Okay.
Well, I know. Well,
don't do that, Teresa. Don't do that.
Well, I know. Well, I mean, again, I mean, it showed how completely out of touch she is. I mean, an attempt to make her look friendly and human. Because can I say? I mean, some of our viewers may not know, but she's often referred to here in Britain as the Maybot, as in the robot, the Maybot. I mean, because she has so little personality. So this is an attempt to get away from that. I think it just reinforces it. I mean, you should never play those sort of games. The problem with Theresa May is that she doesn't have any political grasp or imagination or sense of direction or idea of what she's doing or where she's going. This has been obvious to me for a long time. I was writing about this. You can go on the Duran and you can see it. I was writing about this before anybody, within about a month of her becoming prime minister. It is staggering to me that now that everybody can see it, nobody seems able or ready to do anything about it. Peter?
Well, she's just a policy wonk and a bad one at that.
A very bad one. Very, very bad one. I mean, absolutely unfit for the job that she has.
All right, we had a question before this from Marcus, who wants to know, does Peter and Alexander, do you guys ever disagree on any topics?
I knew that one was coming. You try first, Alexander.
Well, I'm going to say this. I think to some extent, I mean, I'm certainly not a social conservative to the extent that Peter is. I mean, I have more time for feminism, for some of these things. I mean, my background, I should explain, is old-fashioned European social democracy, the kind of politics that were very widespread in Europe up to about the 1980s. And I think Peter comes from a different place. And I think as a result, we see things, we see some things in a different way. But the problem is at the moment, what we're facing is making us converge on more and more issues. So, I mean, you know, somebody like me who has a lot of sympathy, for example, with feminism, with the feminist movement, when I see something like what happened to Brett Kavanaugh, the way in which the whole issue of presumed innocent unless proved guilty is completely cast aside, who sees how accusations are treated as truths simply because of the way the person who is making them and the gender of the person that is making them. As an old-fashioned European social democrat, I am profoundly shocked. And, you know, I find that awful. And I think, you know, this is something where, as I said, our views converge, and I think this is happening with more and more issues. Peter, you wanted to say things.
I think that's a brilliant way of describing it. Yeah, because of this radical center that has come into play. You know, it's the Tony Blairs and it's the Bill Clintons, and I'm very much more to the right than Alexander, but our criticism is the same of what we see, okay, from different trajectories, all right? Because what has happened is that the center here is become radical and incoherent and self-destructive for everyone else around them, okay? That's why I've said repeatedly is that I think maybe, and Alexander can correct me, I mean, when you say a European social democrat, I mean, in many ways, there's pepperings of progressivism in there. And I can easily have conversations with progressives. I mean, we will come up with a lot of things to disagree with, but we'll find things to agree with too. It's this American liberals. I think they've just gone Looney Tunes.
Exactly.
Because it's virtue signaling. It's on your emotions. It's how you feel. I don't give a fuck how you feel. Okay, I simply don't. We have problems and we need to resolve them. and keep your feelings to yourself. Take it home to your spouse or a bottle of vodka. We don't need to talk about it. Keep your feelings to yourself.
Exactly. Can I just say, I mean, I've been recently reading a book by Tucker Carlson, who, again, politically, as I said, is not on my side, or wasn't, or wouldn't have been 20 years ago. And yet he makes exactly the same points. He says, Tucker says this, I miss the old left.
Yeah.
I miss the old left. I am a conservative, but I miss the old left that was, just as I, as a old left person, miss the old right that was. We had a dialogue with each other. We had a kind of balance. What we have now, and Peter is right to call it a militant center, I would add an highly authoritarian and anti-democratic center.
There we go, agreeing again.
Well, there we go. Exactly, we're agreeing. But that is the convergence. I think we said quite a lot on this question.
Alexander, can you go into the Bavaria elections?
Yeah, I think these are going to be incredibly interesting. They're underway as we're speaking. Bavaria is the richest and biggest state in the Federal Republic of Germany. It has always had a very distinct identity. It's always been uncertain to some extent about whether it wanted to be German part of Germany at all.
Catholic.
Exactly, it's Catholic. It has in Munich. It's had a strong left-wing tradition in Munich. The rest of the Bavaria is conservative and Catholic, and it has been dominated since the Second World War by the CSU, which is the Christian Social Union, which is a conservative party historically to the right of the CDU. Now, it is part of the coalition government led by Angela Merkel, and it appears to be cracking. It is bleeding support on the right to the AfD, this new party that is appearing in Germany and which is taking a more traditional, in some ways, right-wing position and is taking votes from the CSU. And of course, immigration has been a major issue here. And at the same time, what we're seeing on the left is that the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which is Germany's oldest party, and which is also in coalition with Angela Merkel, is bleeding votes to the left, to the Greens. So we are seeing that the center in Bavaria seems to be breaking down, and the German politics is radicalizing or is polarizing. The Greens on the left in Bavaria, the AfD on the right. I suspect something similar is happening in the old East German Länder, where I suspect the left, the role of the Greens there is going to be played by the Linkspartei. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that Angela Merkel's position is going to be undermined further? I think probably yes, but we are going to have to see exactly how those votes play, because if the CSU loses its majority or is severely weakened in some form, that is going to inevitably make more and more people in Bavaria, in the CSU, in the CDU itself, that's Merkel's own party, and in the SPD, question whether the centrist coalition can continue for much longer.
And I think also, and Alexander Mercouris is much more up on this than I am, but if you look at it, the weakening of the current coalition obviously is going to be making people look at alternatives, and that's not necessarily good for the alternative parties. It has a very interesting dynamic here. I mean, because people are going to say, well, Merkel's not great, and in the view of others, we could have worse. So she can really play that. And
absolutely.
Now, I have to say that Angela Merkel is the biggest disappointment of a politician that I actually had a liking for at one point, because I really thought, being from the East, a Russian speaker, that she would have been able to really create an entente with Russia, because Putin was in East Germany when he was an officer in the KGB. I mean, they have a lot of commonalities there, and I would have thought that they literally would have had a language to speak with each other on, but that seems to have been a failure. And it's because Germany just doesn't have doesn't really have the stones to talk about sovereignty. History is really touchy for them on that issue. That's why they embrace the European Union so much. They can express their views and attitudes through Brussels, not through Berlin. And this is a historical puzzle that needs to be, or a knot that needs to be cut, okay? I think of all people in Europe, it's the Germans that have learned from their past, okay? The rise of these populist parties, I'm not so worried about. Everyone likes to run, the sky is falling, but the Germans have really taken it in, okay? Unlike, let's say, like the Japanese, for example.
Yes.
So I'm not worried so much about the rise of the right in Germany, at least not yet, okay? I think it's a lot of people just saying, whoa, enough of this project, okay? It's just gone way too far.
I should say straight away, I agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of people in the AfD, and some of them are frankly disturbing and brilliant. But to talk about a slide to fascism in Germany, I mean, I think is wildly, insanely overblown. I mean, Germany is a big country in Europe. It's a rich country. It has a long history. I think that the time, a lot of Germans are saying to themselves, the time has finally come for Germany to start behaving like a normal country again, and to start looking after itself a bit more, looking after its own interests. These might not necessarily always square with economic interests, but interests are not always entirely and exclusively economic. Maybe we want to have a Germany that looks after Germans more than, say, immigrants. I mean, these are dialogues that you have in every country. And the fact that they're starting in Germany is not something that we should be pressing panic buttons about.
Yeah,
it's overdue.
I was trained as an academic historian, and one of the problems that current German historiography has is that because of the horrors of the Third Reich and the Nazi regime, is that they go into this kind of cul-de-sac where all of German history will move to that one center moment, Auschwitz, and it's not true.
It's not true.
That's not to diminish the horrific regime of the Nazis, but there's so much more to German culture and its own civilization, and I think there's a time that they need to be able to step back and really, like any country does, any society does, is to embrace the best parts of your culture and your history, and to come to terms with the worst part. And I think they have.
Yes.
All right, but before we get to the super chats, which we have a few coming in right now, Peter, can you tell us real quick, why are you living?
My dog stole my super. I had to get it back. Okay.
Well, the question is for you, Peter. Why are you living in Moscow? Then we're going to get to super chats, and then we're going to get.
I love this city. I love my city, Moscow. I'm a Moscovite now. Look, as Western cities, in San Francisco, they pay people $175,000 a year to pick up people defecating in the street, urinating in syringes and all of this. You don't see any of that here. Mm-hmm. I've been here for 20 years. And I have to admit the World Cup helped, but this city is a shiny penny right now. I mean, it's getting too modern. It's losing its flavor, okay? Russians are not into small talk. You don't have to waste a whole lot of time. It's because of the financial crisis of 2008. Competition came into the marketplace, so it's a lot more affordable to live right now. Before, there was a small group of importers, and they cut up among themselves and sold everything very, very expensively. We would laugh at Zara, the department store, where they would even keep the euro price on it. They would stamp on top of it the ruble, so we could see the difference of what we were having to pay because of unfair competition. And now that is all gone. Mm-hmm. Other than any kind of food you want to eat, you can find it. Anything you want to buy, you can find it. I mean, they talk about isolation and all that. It's nonsense here. This is a modern city that works, and Muscovites are very, very proud of it. Also, and I'll leave on this, a fabulous, stupendous public transportation system. I haven't driven a car in 20 years. Yes, and I won't probably have to ever drive one again. You don't need a car. If you have a family, maybe you need it. But if you don't have any necessity to have a car, you don't have to have a car.
All right, we're going to get to some super chats, but let's say some quick hellos to Henry Morgan. Hello, Pax Bella. Hello, Lindsay Sang. Greetings, gents. Melina Bianca, best team ever. Thank you, Melina. Sarah Carell, good to see you guys. Hello from Federico Pericini. I think, big hello. Federico, I think, writes for the Strategic Culture, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. And a very great writer.
Great writer. Love his articles. Definitely check him out. And let's see. We have, from Lexington, Kentucky, from Hawaii, Henry from Hawaii. Hello, Henry. And a super chat for, it was right down here, for £2 from the Sweetie Gammon. It's pronounced Teresa, not Teresa. Is that correct, Alexander?
Well, I always say Theresa May, so I mean that's my pronunciation. I think you hear many people say it, but it's a hard T.
All right, we have.
I always say I don't speak English; I speak American, so it's not my fault.
All right. Gloria Almond said Tucker is a good guy. Yeah, yep. I think he's a good guy. €10 super chat from George. Thank you very much, George, for the super chat. No questions. £5 super chat from Afterglow. Alexander, how dangerous is the Verhofstadt's statement for the U.S. to intervene in Hungary?
Can you say that question again?
How dangerous is Verhofstadt's statement for the U.S. to intervene in Hungary?
Well, I don't know who this person is, Verhofstadt, but I mean, intervention.
Maybe I'm not pronouncing it right, but I think I got it right.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, briefly, any intervention by the United States in the sovereign affairs of Hungary, if that's what the question is, would be extremely bad. And we've talked about Hungary many times. Alex and I have done it on our programs. Peter has. Any attempt by people to try to change the political situation.
What does the U.S. have to do with Hungary?
Well, exactly. Well, but Peter. But the US is in Hungary. I mean, you know, George Soros has his university there, and that's, of course, a big issue. And there's been attacks on this. There's attacks on Hungary from Paul Krugman. There's Hungary is in NATO, and there's been criticisms of Hungary because of all of these things. So, you know, intervention in another country's affairs is wrong. If Hungary is an ally of the US should accept it as it is. It is a democracy, it is a functioning democracy, and the Hungarian people should be left by themselves to sort out their own problems.
Wait, the US should clean up Chicago, okay? Why don't they worry about Chicago before they start worrying about Hungary?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. We had a question before the chat from Caramel Roach. Peter, is the US preparing for war against Iran?
Of course. There's always contingencies, and they're being updated all of the time. They play war games, armchair generals, and then they do exercises. I mean, they're constantly looking at Iran's defenses. It doesn't mean they're going to do it immediately, but they're prepared for almost any contingency. And I'll tell you, any general that goes through those war games knows it's a nightmare, absolute nightmare. That's probably the reason why it hasn't happened already. Of course, you know, it's the Israelis and the Saudis that would love to have the Americans go to war with Iran for them, okay? Because that's what they want, all right? And neither one of those countries will participate in that unless, you know, Trump is just, you know, hog crazy that he's going to take out, you know, and occupy. I mean, that would be, look at the disaster of Iraq. Look at the disaster of Afghanistan. Iran is a total different kettle of fish, completely.
Alexander, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, it's a point I've made many times about the US. The US has no reverse gear, so they've made Iran into this demon place in the Middle East, which, by the way, it isn't. It's not responsible for terrorism. It's not the major destabilizer of the Middle East. But the US says it is. It's now cranking on sanctions against Iran. It's trying to push regime change inside Iran. It's trying to provoke protests inside Iran. When all that fails, what does the US do, given the things it is saying about Iran? In this kind of situation, I have to say that it seems to me that the real risk of a war becomes very great, because how do you the United States is taking towards Iran? And Peter is absolutely right. The Pentagon is constantly planning. It plans all the time for wars against countries like Iran. So I think we are on that escalator towards a war. I think it will take some time. I think the military will be absolutely horrified. And let us hope that in the end, at the last moment, the politicians in Washington will draw back. But anybody who counts on reason and logic prevailing in Washington, is gambling on, is hope over experience, I'm afraid.
Yeah, but the thing is that when you look at Iran from the prism of Washington particularly, you have to think counterintuitively. They need the threat. They want the threat, okay? Because and that helps regional allies, the Emirates, the Saudis, other Gulf countries. Well, there's a threat with Iran, so here, buy all our weapons, okay? I mean, the threat is an end in itself, not a military conflict, which would be a nightmare, but constantly saying it's a threat. The same thing, Russia plays that same role. China plays that same role. It's not that they're real threats, but they are conceived threats that are a policy end in themselves. That's, that's a lot of wasted money. And if you have the U.S. and Russia and China maneuvering in the Arctic, which is the new place to go, there's always that potential for a mistake. Common sense would say, the Arctic, why don't we call that a demilitarized zone? So no one puts their weaponry there. No one. See, I'm not a genius. I'm a common sense guy, like Tucker, okay? That's one way to deal with it. No, because that's a new theater of threat, and we have to make these ships, and we have to pour all this money into it. That's what the military likes doing. That's what they do best, by the way.
Peter, I think you're getting some reverb. Can you give the headphones a shot, if that's okay?
We'll try.
And Alexander, while Peter's trying that, Alexander, we're going to get to the super chats. We have some more super chats. We'll get to them. But first, Alexander, there's a question from Afro Priapus. I hope I got that right. How can Turkey have good relations with Greece and Armenia and solve its problems with these two countries in the future?
Well, that is a huge question. I mean, it requires a lot of thinking in Turkey itself. I'm afraid any attempt by Turkey to have good relations with Armenia means acknowledging the things that happened at the end of the Ottoman Empire, which involved the genocide, the massacres of Armenians. This is going to be a very difficult thing in Turkey because there is so much opposition in Turkey to admitting that. I think if they do admit that, if they finally accept that things went wrong long ago by a government that doesn't exist anymore. Exactly. Then, as I said, there is no fundamental reason why relations between Turkey and Armenia could not improve, and they could improve radically. And I would add something else, which Turkey could also, in that case, play a constructive role in helping Armenia sort out its problems with Azerbaijan, which is the
Nagorno-Karabakh, yeah.
Exactly, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. But I mean, it would improve Turkey's position in the world. And I think a fear that I think some people in Turkey have, that if they start making admissions to the Armenians, that there will be more demands for Turkish territory to be handed over to Armenia. I mean, I think that is absolutely not going to happen. I think that is a completely fantastic fear. Now, with Greece, it's both easier and more complicated. In that Greece and Turkey are theoretically allies in NATO. We have long-standing relations with each other. If Turkey wants to have a good relationship with Greece, it needs to work towards a solution of the Cyprus problem, and it needs also to start accepting that these Greek islands near the coasts of Turkey are in fact Greek islands. And I think, again, looking at this thing from a Turkish point of view, purely from the point of view of national interest, good relations with Greece and good relations with Armenia, but good relations with Greece, are worth a few islands, which are Greek and have been Greek for a long time. Now, I'm not saying that the Turks are laying claims to these islands, but the way they sometimes behave almost gives the impression that they are. So, as I said, if all this is dialed down, and as I said, Greece and Turkey pursues a policy of friendship with Greece, I think it could play rich dividends. Can I say this has happened before? In the 1930s, relations between Greece and Turkey, when Turkey was led by Kemal Atatürk and Greece was led by Eleftherios Venizelos, actually became very good for a time. We were even involved at that time in something called the Little Entente. And there was also a time in the 60s when relations between Turkey and Greece were quite good. So it's possible. I mean, there is no reason, objective reason why that can't happen. But as I said, it needs people in Turkey to think about their interests and to put aside some of these hangovers from the past.
Well, the interesting thing, if I could just finish up on that, the Ottoman Empire admitted what it did. It didn't use the word genocide, but it admitted what it did.
Exactly.
It just befuddles me why the Turkey, the new Turkey that came out of the First World War, why do they cling to that? It was the Ottomans that did it. And so making that admission would go a far way. I mean, what are you going to do? Prosecute the people from the Ottoman Empire? They're all dead.
It is. Can I just add something? Which is, of course, we must not confuse the Ottoman Empire with Turkey.
Exactly.
The Ottomans, as a dynasty, went out of their way to deny the fact that they ruled over an ethnic Turkish state or that their empire was Turkish. I mean, the secular Turkish Republic that was created out of the Ottoman Empire is a very distinct state. The Ottoman Turkish and modern Turkish are not even the same language anymore. So, as I said, why this issue is left to hang over in the way that it is very baffling. And Peter's absolutely right, and he's right to mention it, that the Ottomans admitted it. So there's no reason for modern Turkey, that has no responsibility for it, to go on plugging this thing with the Armenians when it has no purpose anymore.
All right, we got a super chat from Jan Schoenfield, 20 Canadian dollars. Thank you very much. No question. Afterglow gave us a super chat for £5. Thank you, Afterglow. And the Sweaty Gammon said for £5, if you can't even say the Prime Minister's name properly, how good is the rest of the analysis? That was a super chat. Oh, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm not saying it. Maybe Alex. I don't know. I think Alexander is definitely saying it correct. He's got.
Well,
I don't. I'm here. Peter's got the American, so.
Yeah,
who knows? It's always my excuse. So.
Yeah.
What do you want?
In Britain, we all pronounce our names, words in different ways, but there we go.
All right, Peter. This is a question from Marcus before we started the chat. Bear with me. It's a little bit of a longer question on Venezuela and how the right treats Venezuela. And the question is: many debaters on the right. I can't say alt-right since the term has changed its meaning since Hillary Clinton.
Good point.
Like Stixon, Hexenhammer, Sargon of Akkad, Paul Joseph Watson, like to criticize Venezuela in vitriolic terms. My question is in part, what are the future prospects for Venezuela? What are the cause of the current situation?
Well, yeah, people on the political right, I don't necessarily would call them conservative, because this is where, and I'm glad this question is asked, because this is where I kind of part with a lot of conservatives. You know, it's always cultural conservative and capitalism. Well, they're not necessarily joined at the hip, in my opinion, okay? The problem with Venezuela is poor governance and the unlucky situation of being so damn oil rich, okay? And this happens to countries all of the time. It's called Dutch disease, all right? Russia, up until, I would say, 2008, suffered from the same. When you always know there's going to be a huge cash inflow, particularly if the oil prices are high, you're lazy and you're corrupt, all right? And what has happened with Venezuela is, I think it's poor governance. It's not necessarily socialism where everybody, you know, climbs the walls. I don't know why the United States should care what political system within reason Venezuela has. Why? It's up to the Venezuelan people to figure that out. Another thing is that the United States is constantly trying to undermine the economy and political stability of Venezuela. I mean, that's a full-time job for a lot of people in the CIA and other people, NED, all these kind of quasi NGOs where the U.S. government funds them to overthrow governments and undermine the confidence of foreign governments. Okay, I can bet you my bottom dollar they have a new cabinet lined up, in the suburbs of Washington around Langley, okay, to fly them in and take over, okay. So, and Colombia is not playing a positive role. You're being used as a conduit to destabilize Venezuela. It's not that they have a socialist government. It has its problems. Their model has problems, but it's not, all their problems are not because of their model, all right? And what happened to, people deciding their own destiny, self-determination? The right-wingers in the United States always, they make my hair on fire. Why are you talking about Venezuela? Okay, first of all, you probably don't know much about it. Okay, and it's something for the Venezuelan people to work out. Yeah, there's some suffering there. They don't know how to deal with low oil prices because they're so wedded to having so much money coming in, and they have not been able to solve the problem of dealing with when so much money does roll in. Okay, they have to be much more disciplined and not be so reliant on oil exports. And Chavez was, okay. I mean, when he was there, the oil prices were really high, so the pie was big, and he distributed it. But there's a lot of people in high places in the Venezuelan government that just pocket enormous sums of money, and it's known. Okay, so it's more of a governance issue. It's not their political system per se.
Can I just add something, which is, of course, that governance issues in Venezuela and indeed in South America generally are universal. We have an economic crisis at the moment in Argentina with, I think, is it 60% or is it 40% interest rates? Things are looking bad there. We have a political crisis we have a political crisis in Brazil with the car wash scandal and the election of Bolsonaro, and 60,000 people apparently murdered in Brazil every year. We have massive problems in Mexico where drugs are all over the place. There is a fundamental problem of governance across Latin America. There are a few isolated places like Costa Rica and wherever which are a bit better. But Venezuela is going through a particularly bad time at the moment for all the reasons that Peter said, but we must not overlook the fact that it looks bad, partly because the region in which it is bad. Latin America has not sorted itself out, and these very right-wing people, who perhaps understandably are using Venezuela as a sort of whipping boy for socialism, what they call socialism, need to be aware of the fact that, as I said, Latin America, the whole situation in Latin America is not good. And Venezuela is not quite the outlier in that respect that they perhaps think it is.
Yeah, right, hang on. With Venezuela, what they want is they want a change of government. They want to privatize the oil companies. It'll line the pockets of a small group of people. They want their oil back. They want it back for their own personal use. And and what I think is the oil companies should be nationalized. That is God's given wealth to the people of Venezuela, and that's how. They should be more efficient in how they run those companies. I mean, they're very leaky with corruption. All right, so but that's really what they want. It's not about democracy. Forget that. Only people in the Beltway talk about democracy. Okay, it's nonsense. Okay, it has nothing to do with democracy or the health of civil society. They don't care about people. They care about their profits and maybe pushing what they think is their idealized ideology. Okay, saving people from themselves. The U.S. should stay home and worry about Chicago and San Francisco, and California is turning into a third world country because of poor governance and bad ideology.
All right, let's get to some more super chats. Chelsea SW6 says Alexander is the boss. Yeah, Alexander is the boss for sure.
He is the boss.
And American Rebel 27 sent us a $10 super chat. No question. Thank you for the super chat, American Rebel. From Beatrix, $20. Peter, NATO Supreme Commander glad U.S. carrier puts Russia on notice. Question, how much of a threat is Russia?
To whom?
U.S., NATO.
Zero. I mean, look, if you look at Russian military doctrine, that it periodically is updated, it has no offensive designs at all. You know, if you look at Russia in 2018, it's very similar to what Russia was in 1913 with the First World War looming. What was Russia's foreign policy and military policy then? To hold on what they have. And that's the same thing that applies today. Okay, look, if I've said to people, if the 3 Baltic republics held a referendum to join Russia and it passed 99%, the Russians still wouldn't take them. They'd say, no, we don't want you. And as a matter of fact, most people in the Baltic republics don't want the Baltic republics because they're leaving. The kids, young people are going to Australia, America, Britain. Okay? I mean, there's no designs. Again, you know, I don't want to sound like a broken record. First of all, Russia didn't invade eastern Ukraine. It didn't invade Crimea. It already had 25,000 troops in Crimea, and they were there with the permission of the then legal government in Kiev, starting in 1991, a treaty that was updated 4 times. And if Russia indeed invaded the Donbass, why didn't it just take Kiev? It could have taken Kiev in a weekend, but it doesn't want that. It doesn't want to rule over people that don't want to be ruled by Russia. Okay, so zero threat. But what we're having now, Russia has the right to defend its border. That's what it's gotten down to. Russia defending its border, not having any foreign policy designs beyond that.
Alexander, you want to chime in real quick?
Yes, I mean, I'll just very quickly. I mean, here we have an American aircraft carrier floating near Russia. We have talk about an American base being installed in Poland near Russia. Yet Russia is the country that's threatening, and the United States is the country that's putting Russia on warning. Surely this is turning reality on its head again. What conceivable respect can one describe forward deployments of aircraft carriers and military bases carried out in contravention of agreements that were reached? In what conceivable way can one regard that as proof of Russia threatening anybody? It's again this extraordinary reversal that Americans constantly engage in.
Yeah, Russia is moving its borders to an aircraft carrier. My God! Come on, let's make sense here.
Sense now.
All right, we got a £2 super chat from Afterglow. Thank you for the super chat. Alexander, is Operation Gladio still going on in Europe?
I doubt it. I doubt it in exactly the form that it was back in the 70s. If I can just explain. Upgraded. Well, maybe. I mean, Operation Gladio was this extraordinary program that existed in which people, the CIA was heavily involved, which involved basically eliminating dissidents and people of that kind. It was very, very prominently used in Italy, and that's really where it focuses on. But I don't think that happens quite in that same way anymore. Having said that,
they don't have to. They don't have to because they have willing servants. Okay,
Exactly.
you don't even have to ask them. They go to that. They can say, "What do you want us to say?"
Exactly. If the situation were to change, maybe things might look different. But as I said, at this moment in time, as I said, with the European elite, which is completely loyal, essentially, there's no reason. There's no reason for it, and we shouldn't look for it.
All right, we got a £10 super chat from Sweaty Gammon, who said some of the people in Venezuela are mining virtual gold from video games to make enough money to eat. Women are selling their bodies for less than $50.
Yep. Oh yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, right. As we've said, it's poor governance, okay, and people suffer. And but the way the U.S. is putting pressure on Venezuela doesn't
help. All right. I'm not sticking up for the government in Venezuela at all. Zero.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, on the contrary, I think we're both extremely critical of the government. What we are simply saying is it's a Venezuelan problem and it's a Latin American problem, and that's how it should be. That's how it should be dealt with.
All right, we got some questions, a lot of questions coming in on Syria.
Yeah.
I just want you guys to combine it. Alexander combined it into an update. There's questions about what if Israel strikes Syria? What if the US strikes Syria? What's going on? Can you give us an update on Syria and what's going on and what's Russia up to? A lot of people are asking.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is. I mean, the situation. Always the situation in Syria is extremely complicated. So first of all, let's take it step by step. There is the situation in Idlib. There is a buffer zone there. The Russian and the Turkish militaries are present in Idlib, and they seem at the moment to be working together. There's talk about some of these armed groups, these terrorist armed groups, moving their heavy weapons away. Some of them are openly opposing, though, this agreement. So it's a very fragile situation in Idlib, but at the moment it's a peaceful one. And as I said, it is one where gradually some kind of normality is being restored. That's Idlib. At the same time, we have a situation with the United States talking up once again the need for regime change. It seems extraordinary after all that's happened that people seem to be stuck on this. They're saying they're going to impose a ferocious economic embargo on Syria until that regime change happens. They disguise the demand for regime change by talking about a constitutional process, but we all know that that is what they mean. And of course, they're trying to dig into the Kurdish areas, where there's now increasing talk about unifying the Kurdish areas and making a kind of state there. Last and not least, there is the S-300 missile deployments in Syria, the Russian S-300 missile deployments. There is talk about the US and Israel improving their aircraft, their F-35 and F-22 stealth aircraft, and apparently wargaming possible attacks on these missiles, which would be extremely dangerous. Now, one point I would make about the S-300 deployments is, of course, as we all know, they all happened after a Russian surveillance plane was shot down by mistake during an Israeli raid. But of course, it also happened a couple of weeks after the United States appeared to be threatening missile strikes on Syria in the event of an offensive by the Syrian army in Idlib province. So it could be, it probably is, that those S-300 missiles were partly intended to deter that also. So we have a very complicated game. We have lots of people, players, trying to interfere in it all the time. But it is very clear to me that the Russians are trying, their major game in Syria is to try step by step, incrementally, to put it back together again and to bring peace to the country. And whatever your feelings about Russia and what Russia does elsewhere, I think if you look at the situation objectively, you should see that. And if you care about Syria, you should support it.
And just to add a little bit here, Idlib province is slowly but surely being liberated. It doesn't get a lot of publicity, and that's exactly the way the Syrians and the Russians want it. It's street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood. It's essentially negotiating, reconciliation, creating corridors for people to leave if they want to leave. It's a slow process here. Also, one thing I'd add to what Alexander had to say is that the U.S. is there in its mission creep in search of a mission, okay? And it has, as I always say, it has really everything to do with Iran.
Yeah.
All right, Tony in Southwark says that the previous super chat about Verhofstadt, he said, tell Alex it's Guy Verhofstadt of the EU Parliament who's anti-Orban.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that does not surprise me. I mean, the EU Parliament is a dominated
waste of time.
Well, indeed. I mean, absolutely. And as I said, it is pathologically hostile at the moment to Hungary. And as we know, they tried to vote. There was a vote in the EU Parliament to strip Hungary of its voting rights within the EU. Having said that, the other EU states have said that they will oppose this. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me. And as I said, this is part of the campaign of the European establishment to silence Orban and to put Hungary in its place. We have done programs about this on the Duran. Alex and I, and Peter and Alex have done them too. And I would urge people to see this. We have discussed all this in detail.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat, £4.99 from Fender Stats. Why is China replacing Russia as the latest U.S. boogeyman? How significant is the deployment of the S-300 in Syria? Will it deter the neocons in Israel?
Ooh, that's a lot to unpack right there.
Well, let's go into the China becoming the latest U.S. boogeyman to replace Russia.
Well, it's very convenient. Okay, it's a communist country. I mean, keep hearing that all the time. The communist dictatorship. I've been to China. I don't see it as a dictatorship. Okay, but I'm not Chinese. Essentially, again, as I said earlier in our chat here, the entire intelligence community and defense community need an enemy. And in China, it's a formidable power, and its military is expanding. And there's the whole issue of the South China Sea, a major trading artery in the world. I'd like to point out it's named South China Sea for a reason, because it's next to China. It's not next to California, all right? So the Chinese are already there. And basically, the U.S. is demanding China that the U.S. can go anywhere at any time when it comes.
We've lost him.
We lost Peter. Do you want to pick that up, Alexander?
Yes, I will pick that. I mean,
for Peter to come on board.
Peter was saying very interesting things, but of course, I mean, one of the things I would say about all of this is, of course, China is now either the world's biggest economy, if you look at it on purchasing power parity levels, or the second biggest economy, and it's creeping up steadily on the US. And the US finds that a very difficult thing to accept. The US finds any challenge to its primacy a very difficult thing to accept. In some ways, it is surprising, given their outlook in the US, that it has taken them so long to hit on China as their great potential adversary. And of course, there's also the very powerful sense of grievance that some people in the US feel, a sense of grievance which I don't personally think is justified, that the Chinese somehow stole US jobs by taking advantage of the US at trade levels. And that also plays into it. And also what plays into it are all the things Peter was talking about just now, about the South China Sea, about the contest for control in the Pacific. And last but not least, I think the Republicans have hit on China because it's their way to talk about another country than Russia, which the Democrats are trying to say the Republicans, or Donald Trump at least, are sympathetic to. So the Republicans are saying the Democrats are soft on China to counterbalance the way that the Republicans say, the Democrats say that Trump is soft on Russia.
All
it's
right,
completely misguided.
Yeah, okay, while we wait for Peter to get back on board, Duncan McCowan has a question. What does the panel think of the recent grounding of the F-35? Is this a parable of the inefficiency of the military-industrial complex?
I am not a military engineer, so I mean, I've heard lots of things about the F-35. What I have heard, and I have spoken to somebody who was a military engineer, it is an overcomplicated aircraft for what it was supposed to do. It was given far too many roles, and it's an attempt to pack into a fairly small item far too many capabilities and far too much technology. And going back to the question, the reason that happened was that, of course, it made an awful lot of people an awful lot of money. It is $1 trillion program. So in a sense, I suppose the fact that this program has been so troubled, has been so expensive, has gone so far over cost, is a sign of the structural deficiency and inefficiency of the military-industrial complex in the United States. Something, by the way, I've been hearing people talk about for 30, 40 years, and which nothing ever seems to be done to sort out.
All right, we have 2 super chats, once again from the Sweaty Gammon. The first one is, why does Alex talk with a fake accent? Is this Alex or that Alex? I don't know.
Well,
I think your accent is real.
My accent is absolutely real. I mean, I appreciate it sounds a bit unusual, but I mean, it's only unusual because of the times we live in. When I first came to England in the 60s, it wasn't unusual at all. But I'm afraid I've clung to it as everyone else has changed. And there are other people still in Britain who talk like me.
I'm back.
Peter's back.
Well done.
What'd I say? What'd I say?
I don't know, Peter. Google cut you off. You were talking about China.
Hey, we've gone from Russia to China. Okay, I guess that's
Alexander continued your comments and finished it out, but you're just in time for a follow-up to that super chat once again from the Sweetie Cabin. When the Chinese government builds over their own city and doesn't respect property rights, they are communists. No question. That's just
okay. Look again. I don't know why it's really incumbent to people from the outside to determine the political system of another. You know, having a communist government with the most capitalistic economic system in the world. You know, get your head around that. Okay, I think it's just really a misnomer now, and I think we need to dwell upon it. Are human rights violations committed in China? Yeah. Okay. Seriously. All right. But the thing is that criticism demands action. So what are you going to do? Okay. And is it really an endeavor in futility? Sure, you can say, you know, we don't think that's a good idea, what you do. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do. You know, don't want to deal with them? Or you want to overthrow their government? I mean, it's just not a very nuanced thing. I don't understand, you know, why this is thrown out because you don't do what we tell you to do. This is American exceptionalism again. You know, everyone must be a Jeffersonian Democrat. Okay, that's just ridiculous here. That doesn't underplay the importance of what happens domestically in China. But what are we supposed to do about it? Okay, that's the problem.
All right, Alexander, we have a question from Reckless Abandon. Let's see if you know this news.
It's a good name.
Yeah, very good name. What about the Ukrainian delegation terrorizing the Russian TV presenter with Nazi songs and salutes in Strasbourg?
Well, again, I haven't heard about it, but if it's happened, it doesn't.
Of course, it happens.
Yeah. Yes, I mean it's the sort of thing. I mean, if you follow the news from the Ukraine, and massively depressing it is, by the way, to do that. I mean, you will see that this sort of thing goes on there all the time. I mean, there are openly Nazi groups in Ukraine. There are openly Nazi militias operating on the front lines in the war in Ukraine. Some of those have carried out violent and very brutal atrocities. And of course, these groups were absolutely instrumental in staging the Maidan coup in
backed by the West.
2014, which was backed by the West. And these groups are backed by the West because they are pathologically hostile to Russia. They see Russia as this great enemy of the Ukrainian national state that they want to create. And it would not surprise me at all if there were groups of them taunting Russians in Strasbourg or wherever. If it did happen in Strasbourg, all I could say is it's astonishing that in the capital in one of the 2 capitals of the European Union, it got so little attention in the West. But that's another truth about the whole Ukrainian horror story. That however bad it gets in Ukraine, however appalling the behavior in Ukraine, however disgracefully Ukrainians behave, they are always given a free pass for it in the West.
And the problem is that you have a regime in Ukraine that has an ideology that essentially gets down to a nationalism without a nation. See, they're trying to create a nation artificially through terror, through cowing people, forcing people to leave. This is the 20th century tells us everything about this. It's a disaster, okay? And it's backed by the U.S. The U.S. and the European Union has shown itself to be, again, spineless in dealing with this issue, okay?
Yes.
They helped it. They helped create it. Now they don't take any responsibility for their really illegal behavior in overthrowing a democratically elected government in Ukraine. When Yanukovych was elected, he got congratulations from around the globe, including the European Union, including the United States.
Well said. Okay, guys, we finished out our first hour. Let me just take a minute to tell everybody, send those super chats. They really help us out a lot. Also, go to the Duran shop and grab a t-shirt. The t-shirts are great. You will love them. That also helps us out a lot. And you will also find in the description links to our PayPal and Patreon. Please donate to us so we can continue to pump out videos for you guys. We enjoy the videos and we love your comments and we love your support. So thank you to everyone who has donated to us, and thank you to everyone who has bought a shirt. We really, really appreciate it. And let's, before we switch gears to Facebook and the big purge, there's a couple more questions. Two Times wants to know, at the Duran, Bannon versus Russia versus UK influence on electorates. How do they compare? Alexander, you want to take a stab at this one?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think Russia has much influence on electorates anywhere. I mean, that's
you mean outside elections?
Outside elections. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine that the Russians have much influence at all. I think Bannon has a certain amount of influence. I don't know how much he has. Probably more in the US. I don't think very much in Europe, actually.
What about what he's trying to do in Europe?
Yeah, I think what he's trying to do in Europe is, perhaps it's interesting that he's trying to bring various people together, but I don't think he's actually having an influence on electorates. He may be having influence on certain politicians who are looking at Bannon's copybook and are saying to themselves, well, you know, he's got interesting ideas. He's somebody who seems to know how to work elections, and maybe we can learn from him. But that happens all the time. That isn't something one should consider particularly new. Who were the other people that were mentioned?
Well, let me just with Bannon here.
Yeah, go on.
Bannon.
Yeah.
I mean, Bannon was really, in many ways, kind of a godfather of the Tea Party movement in 2010, and he's trying to replicate that in Europe. And I don't think it's going to get a whole lot of traction. I just don't. I think what it does is that some of these populist movements want to, how did you do it, Steve? Okay, that's what I think, more of that kind of thing. It's kind of maybe like a master class, but you know, it works with the left because then you have a unifying ideology. Populist movements are, you can have different populist movements in the same country, okay, if we're going towards different ends. So it's much harder to create a template, because a template tends to be more authoritarian, and I don't think that's where everybody wants to go. The populism of Europe is to slow down this postmodernist movement. Okay, that's what they're doing. Not necessarily to reverse it, but to slow it down. All right. So I've been watching Steve Bannon in Europe. I don't get the traction feeling. I get the star effect. You know, wow, Steve Bannon's here. He elected Donald Trump. You know, he invented the Tea Party movement, which neither one are particularly true. Okay, he chronicled the Tea Party movement really well with Sarah Palin from Alaska. So it's in flux. All of this is in flux.
Yeah.
All right, we got another 10-pound super chat from the Sweaty Gammon again, and it's to Peter Lavelle. The comment is, real quick, Peter, it's a reply to your previous answer to the super chat, which is, I am from the UK, not the US, and if people do not have property rights, then it is state theft, like it or not.
I mean, look. I'm not really sure where this is coming from. I absolutely agree. I mean, if the state illegally takes your property, that is a form of authoritarianism, okay? But you also have eminent domain, which is a concept where the state legally can take your property, and I'm most likely most referring to real estate, okay? I don't. You know, I used to be a university lecturer, and I tried to get the students to stay away from all these isms, okay? Because that these are kind of just very broad brush things that don't necessarily explain very much. And I'm sympathetic to the question here, but it's so blunt to try to get a precise answer. But yes, I mean, if the state is stealing property from private citizens, then it's just not communism, that's authoritarianism. And authoritarianism can be left or right, or center, as we see today.
All right, let's shift gears. Peter, the Facebook purge, and then we'll go to Alexander. What are your thoughts? 800 accounts shut down pretty much overnight. The Anti-Media, the Free Thought Project, and a lot more. They were also suspended on Twitter pretty much instantaneously. So what are your thoughts on that? And Alexander, weigh in after Peter.
Well, this will be the moment where the decline and fall of Facebook starts, okay? Because what they're doing this is to save their skins, and in the process they could destroy their company. What they're doing is they're bowing their head to power, and because what we see all through the Western world is access to social media does create political outcomes, and it's not outside meddling. That's ridiculous. This is the excuse that is given for somehow the electorate is acting out. It's not behaving. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. Because what democracy in the West right now is basically, it is an exercise to legitimize the political status quo. Brexit broke the rule, naughty, naughty. Trump broke the rule, naughty, naughty. Okay, and so Facebook has decided to give up on it, and all these other social media platforms, to give up on their foundational principles of what a platform should do. And what they're going to do is they're going to destroy themselves in the process. And we talked about, Alex, Christoforou and I earlier, the reason why there isn't a really strong drive to turn these companies into utilities is because the current political elites want to capture these social media platforms for themselves so they can replicate their dead-end ideology, okay? And Facebook and all these other Silicon people, you know, richer than God, they're more than willing to go along with it, but they will destroy their business model and people will go elsewhere. They already are.
Yes, I mean, I agree with this. I mean, what we have seen is an abuse by a private monopoly of its position on behalf of political power, the political power of an establishment which wants to control information. Now, that is so completely contrary to what Facebook was set up to do that it is going to undermine Facebook. I think Peter's absolutely right about this. We've talked about, Alex and I have talked about potential legal challenges to this, because of course, if Facebook is justifying this kind of behavior by saying it is a private company, and that means that it can ban all these people, then it exposes itself as a private monopoly, and private monopolies may be subject to antitrust legislation, which Donald Trump has floated, or they may be challenged on other grounds, on defamation or libel grounds. If, on the other hand, it is a platform acting as an instrument for, as I said, control of information, it is again abusing its position to such an extent that I have to say, I think it might be, and this is a legal point, subject to a First Amendment challenge if it continues down this road. Putting aside these legal arguments, which I think we might see them evolve, it is impossible to control in the information today, in the internet age, the way Facebook is trying to do. I mean, what will happen is all of these other things, it's going to provoke challenges, it's going to provoke competitors, it is going to undermine ultimately its position. If you abuse a monopoly position, you eventually lose it. That is the inexorable law, both of economics and, dare I say, of law.
See, the Gordian knot here is the following, is that when you look at these social media platforms, they have become the public square. But then you have private interests mediating and controlling and censoring that public square.
Yes.
Those are insanely opposites, and they're contradictory. And I don't have the answer, because if they were to turn it into a government utility, then we're in the same boat all over again. Okay, do you trust the government to run social media? I wouldn't want that situation, but I don't trust Mark Zuckerberg either. So I don't have a solution to this, but this is because social media has not only invaded the public square, it has taken over the public square. So it's like having Blackwater. You know, there's police, they're private militias, okay, but they act like an army. The contradictions are getting more and more intense here, and there's no good ending to this story. I'm afraid there's no good ending, because more government control. That's like saying put my head in prison. Okay. That's what you're asking. So everybody said, yes, turn it into utility. No, that's not the answer either.
Yes.
Alexander, a user, Johnny Sparks, has an interesting comment. He says, read their contracts, you have no rights, and we all sign their contracts. What do you make of that? The fact that you sign their terms and conditions, or agreed to their terms and conditions, so Facebook can pretty much do whatever it wants. What's your counter argument to that?
I mean, this is the fundamental point, because, as I said, it is a private company, and because it is a private company, it is saying, look, we have the rights to do all of these things.
That trades publicly.
Even it trades publicly, even though, as Peter said, it controls the public debate to an extraordinary degree because of its monopoly position. If you have a monopoly, however, that is abusing its power, despite the contracts that it makes, there are historically and traditionally challenges that you can bring to monopolies. Standard Oil, which is the big oil company that dominated.
Marbell.
Exactly. And of course, what happened was it was seen as a private company. It had all its contracts, it had all of the arrangements, that it had tied in everything. But eventually, it came to be seen as a threat to the economic and social and political life of the United States, and it was broken up. It was broken up by legislation, and that resulted in all kinds of antitrust laws. So, you know, I think that Facebook needs to think very carefully about what it is. Is it a platform? If it is a platform, does it publish anything that is not illegal? Now, can I just say, all of these,
being a censor, in a sense, makes you a publisher, because you're deciding on content. Okay?
Exactly, but that's exactly the point. You see, none of these sites that I've heard about, none of these people who were banned from Facebook that I have heard broke the law in any way. Facebook, essentially, because it is a private monopoly, is acting as a censor. It's acting as a censor. Now, it is in effect performing a kind of public role despite being a private company, and it is hiding behind the fact that it is a private company to make it possible to do that without facing a public challenge. I don't think that is a sustainable position in the long term. I think there will come a point when people will challenge it. I think people will say, look, if you are a private company and a publisher, you cannot exercise this kind of monopoly position that you have. Conversely, if you are a platform fulfilling a public social role, then you are subject to public law controls, which would mean, despite all these private contracts that you have, that you are subject to the regulations set out in the First Amendment. So, I mean, this is the gray area within which Facebook is working. But can I also say, putting aside these legal points, which I think are pertinent and real, there is also the social reality that people won't accept it, that other platforms are going to be created, because where a monopoly abuses its power in this way, inevitably there will be challenges to it. Facebook cannot control the entire internet.
No, just to maybe explain what Alexander Mercouris and I are both saying. Think about a telephone company,
Yeah.
okay? And as the what we call Ma Bell it turned into a monopoly all the way across the United States. And when they looked at it as a platform, they said, okay, it's a private company, but you're not held responsible for what. If I call Alexander Mercouris using a Ma Bell line, Ma Bell isn't responsible for the content of what we say, okay? They're not legally liable for it, okay? Because it's a pure platform, okay? And that's what Facebook is saying it is, but it's not. It's got an operator listening to our conversation and determining itself the relative value of that conversation. You can't do that. I mean, you can get a court order for wiretapping, and you have to go to a court to do that. Don't ask Carter Page, but you have to go to court and to get that. And this is what essentially Facebook is facing. And you know what they did to Ma Bell? They broke it up into the baby bells, okay? And that's what they should do with Google, and they should do with Facebook. You know, search, Android, all these other things. They need to be detached, and they have to be in a competitive environment. That's part of the solution in breaking them up.
All right, that was actually a question that I was going to ask you. What you think about breaking it up? That was Henry Morgan wanted to know, Peter. So I think
there are precedents to do it. I mean, it's an information company, but I think we have to start seriously thinking about doing that, because I'll tell you, our good viewers, if they don't, well, one day we'll be disappeared too. I'm sorry to say.
All right, Peter, there is a question about crosstalk from Pax Bella. Okay. Why can't you make the episodes longer? I'll summarize it. Can you make the episodes longer like the Monday Bullhorns episodes?
No. It's because it costs money. Okay, it costs money. You know, when you see on television, what we call in television a live, like let's use Tucker Carlson. You know, when he has Mark Stein on, you basically buy through the satellite hookup. Let's say Mark Stein is on for 3 minutes, but to be on the safe side, because you don't know where that 3 minutes is going to begin and end, you buy 7 minutes. Okay, and in that 7 minute period, you'll get your 3 minute live. See, crosstalk, what we do is we buy 40 minutes for a 26, 27 minute program, okay? Because inevitably we start late and we have to get the headshots and the sound and all of that. So we pay for 40, if it's a guest on a satellite link up, it's 40 minutes. It ain't cheap. Now, going from Australia or Sao Paulo or anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere, it's really expensive, okay? In the US, why do we have Washington and New York all the time? Because it's free, because we have a satellite uplink 24/7. That pipe is ours, okay? But it's just all dollars and cents, okay? And with the ruble fluctuating, you know, it's more expensive to have these. What may happen, and I have to be careful because I'm thinking along some online projects where there'll be unlimited amount of time, but that's something for management to decide. But I'm thinking about it.
All right, Alexander, I want to get to this question because this was actually one of the first questions we got before we started the chat. It was from Catherine, and she wants to know about the Arwan brothers and the fact that America seems to be powerless against Pakistan with regard to the Arwan brothers. What do you think of that? How come these guys haven't faced justice in the U.S.? And this kind of dovetails, Alexander, into another topic that I want both you and Peter to talk about, which is Glenn Simpson pleading the fifth. What's going on there? So start with the Arwan brothers because it's kind of related, because they were doing some funny business. With,
an understatement.
And Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all that stuff, and then we'll talk about Glenn Simpson, Russia Gate hoax, and all that stuff.
Yes, well, I mean, if we're talking about perhaps Pakistan is perhaps more my place to start. I mean, if you're looking at Pakistan, we are seeing a decline of influence in the US in Pakistan. And I think this is because the US has again abused its position in Pakistan for so long. But what more can I say about this?
Are they CIA proxy? Start there first, because there's another person, Justin McClure just chimed in. Are they CIA, these guys?
Well, who knows? And I don't think so. I mean, who knows?
They're opportunists.
They're opportunists. That's what I would say. I mean, that is also my own personal opinion. But I mean, you know, it's difficult to see what the US can now do about this situation. And I think we've reached that point. I don't, Peter, you seem to be thinking hard.
Well, I mean, the thing is
Yeah.
that it's corruption.
Yes,
Huge corruption.
huge corruption.
And intense embarrassment.
Yes,
Everyone is embarrassed by all of this. Okay,
Yes.
you let these two people and a family into Congress, and they're reading everyone's mail. They got dirt on everybody. Why do you think it just died? Okay, it just died.
yes,
And of course, Arwen Brothers gave all of this to the Pakistani government. Now they got it. Okay.
yeah,
Hey, how many hard drives do they have? All right. It's an embarrassment all around. How could they penetrate the congressional server? Okay, and nobody noticed. No, really, it's such lax, you know. And it's Russia's fault. It's inside your own people inside in Congress. Okay, with people with police records. Where was the vetting? Okay, I mean, it's a catastrophe all the way around. Nobody wants to push it because too much is going to come out. Okay,
yes,
and particularly if, you know, Congress is, you know, these congressmen are writing to their girlfriends and other things, you know, they've got all copies of it. Okay, and so I think that's the reason why it's just kind of gone nowhere. And I think that's one of the reasons why they didn't, you know, they got away and just like, let them go.
Let them go. Exactly.
So, Peter, take that forward to today with Glenn Simpson pleading the fifth. So he doesn't want to testify in front of Congress.
Same story. Embarrassment and probably criminality. But I want to stress embarrassment more than anything else. Also, how many European allies and Gulf countries were involved in looking for dirt? I mean, it was open season. Hey, folks, you got some dirt on Donald Trump. Send it on over to us.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one of the reasons why Trump backpedaled on releasing all this FISA stuff, because, oh my God, they were involved in it too. And Glenn Simpson knows it all, and that's why we know this thing is a complete, absolute hoax, because he's the key to this invented conspiracy to go after Trump and get Hillary Clinton off the hook. That's all it is, and that's so. And the thing is, the Republicans, you know, some Republicans have good hearts, you know, but most of them are stupid. Okay, they haven't pushed this hard enough, and what they're hoping for, if they lose the House, you'll never hear of Glenn Simpson again. This whole thing will just die. And you know what? New investigations into Donald Trump's corruption will start. Mark my words.
Alexander, what's your
Yes, I mean,
Glenn Simpson?
I'm afraid I agree with. I'm sorry to.
It's all right.
Again with Peter, but I do agree with Peter. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, Glenn Simpson is in fact a pivotal figure in the whole Russiagate thing, because I mean, he was the person who orchestrated so much of what was going on. I mean, he was the person who commissioned Christopher Steele and who was dealing with Christopher Steele. He was the person who was talking to all the newspapers, who was publicizing these stories.
Direct conduit into the DOJ.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, the Republicans in the House should have called him in a year ago, not leave it to this very late stage. But of course they didn't. And I mean, they've had the information since October of 2017, I'm sorry, that the FBI was unable to verify Christopher Steele's dossier. They knew all about what Simpson had been doing. It's incomprehensible to me that they waited so long. And of course, he is pleading the fifth. Of course, he's playing for time. Of course, he's denouncing the Republicans in the House. And of course, he's waiting for the Democrats to win control of the House in the November elections, because exactly as Peter says, he calculates that if that happens, he's going to be scot-free. Now, the only thing I'm going to say, the only point of difference between I have with Peter about this is that I think there is still a small chance, even if the Democrats do win the House, that if somebody else is appointed Attorney General to replace Jeff Simpson,
or the IG.
Exactly. There might be investigations going on from within the DOJ to look at what Simpson and all of these people were doing. But bear something in mind. If the Democrats control the House at that point, they will do everything they can to obstruct those investigations. And they will be in charge of the committees. They will be in charge of the relevant committees. It will not be David Delvin Nunes in charge of the House Intelligence Committee. It will be Adam Schiff. Yeah. And that is going to make it extremely difficult, even if, as I said, a special counsel is appointed to look at these things, even if we have a total turnaround and people from the DOJ and the FBI start asking Glenn Simpson questions. We're going to have it with the House Democrats gunning for him. It's going to be incredibly difficult to gain answers. So, as I said, it's been an appalling mistake leaving it so long. Peter's been saying it for a long time. I've been saying it for a long time. I've not completely given up hope. Maybe the Republicans will hold on to the House. And that's a good reason, by the way, for wanting the Republicans to hold on to the House so they can see this thing through. Maybe even if they don't, we will see investigations happening. But I have to say, I'm not very hopeful.
I think just a slight variation in what Alexander Mercouris had to say. You're absolutely right, Alexander, because of illegal behavior within the DOJ. You might have an internal investigation that goes through that. I think there's more than enough evidence there to continue to investigate that. So that would be beyond Congress. It would be an internal thing. And because it would be internal, we probably wouldn't hear. We would just hear that Bruce Orr was fired, okay, or retired, and that's it. Because I keep using the word embarrassment, okay, because that's really what it's all about here. We don't know the level of illegality, but certainly impropriety all over the place.
Yes. And I mean, embarrassment is the right word, because it is exactly what this whole thing is all about. They don't want the powers that be, the Justice Department, which is heavily implicated in the things that Glenn Simpson was doing. The Democrats, obviously, so many people, they don't want him answering the questions. And they certainly don't want him doing it in public before the House Intelligence Committee. So, because it will eventually flow back on them. And, going back to the Awan brothers, if they really had the connections with the CIA, exactly what Peter says, people don't want them answering questions, because, as I said, the damage that might cause to people's reputations, to certain powerful people's reputations and positions, would be very serious.
Okay, there's a question from Reckless Abandon, a couple of questions, which I'll try to combine into one. He's asking pretty much, how do you see Browder's involvement in all of this? Because it seems that Browder is trying to smear Simpson. And he also makes the point that Simpson did appear before the House and the Senate in 2017.
Yeah, well, he has to appear again because new evidence has come to light, all right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Obviously. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, again, I mean, if we go back to Browder again, I don't know exactly what Browder's roles are, but I mean, he has his fingers in so many different pies. in terms of Simpson, well, I think Peter's just said it.
Yeah, and I think the point is that Peter made is that now there's a lot more evidence that Simpson should testify to.
Absolutely. I mean, we have. I mean, this is what's so exasperating about this. We have essentially now all the facts,
all the puzzle pieces.
All the puzzle pieces are there. All we need is to start slotting them all together, and this is what should have been happening. So that once we slot all the pieces together, then some kind of action should be taken about this. Because let's just be very clear about some of these things. Some of the things that appear to have happened, and I say appear to have happened, I said we've got all the evidence now. Some of these things look to me like serious criminal offenses. We're not talking about, fictional collusion allegations between the Trump campaign and the Russians, where it wasn't even clear what crime was supposed to have been committed. We are talking at actual crimes, and Simpson seems to be a witness to all of this. And of course you want to hear from him. Of course you want to question him. So in order to put all these pieces of the puzzle together, but
this is obstruction of justice. This is obstruction of justice.
Well, exactly.
Guys, weigh in on the midterms. We have some questions on the midterms, and some people want to hear your thoughts on the midterms. Peter, your thoughts. It's coming up soon. And we had Kavanaugh, we had Kanye West at the White House. We had a lot of stuff going on. So, what's your take?
Well, I think let's look at what we know. That a generic vote is it's narrowing, and that is something that should give the GOP some hope. I personally think the Kavanaugh case is emboldened and got the Republican base really angry. I'm still really angry about it. I've just such a assault on common sense and basic justice. And a lot of Republicans feel that way. And you have to remember that for Republicans, they would love another Supreme Court justice. Okay, they really would. And so that's, it's good. Trump is good at, he wants to get some momentum from this, or he's gonna have to have damage control. I think it's only been twice or three times in history that a first-term president, his party, prevailed in the first midterms. The last time it happened was with George W. Bush after 9/11, and that was obviously an anomalous time. So I think for sure the Republicans will hold the Senate. It's still a wild card. I've been looking at some of the polls. The GOP is gaining on all kinds of races for the House across the country. But will it be enough? We still don't know. And remember, the polls got everything wrong in 2016. I keep reminding everybody that.
That's absolutely right. What I would simply add to this is I cannot remember midterms that are more important than these.
The most important.
These are critically important midterms because, as I said, first of all, we've just been talking about Glenn Simpson and about how all of this might be buried and put to sleep, all these things about Russiagate and FBI Gate and all the rest, and that would be a tragedy and very bad, if I may say so, for the United States. But of course, the other thing is, if we have a strongly Democratic House, if the Democrats gain and consolidate control of the House, we're going to see an endless war being fought, which is going to paralyze the US government. It's going to make it incredibly difficult for Donald Trump to implement any kind of policies. And we are going to see polarization of a sort that we have never seen before in the United States. And of course, there's a very strong possibility that we could be seeing attempts to impeach Donald Trump and to impeach other people. Other people. I mean, there's talk about impeaching Kavanaugh now, which I find unbelievable.
You need the Senate to do that. That's not going to happen.
I know.
However,
I understand.
I'm going to pull the thread of what Alexander Mercouris said just a little bit further. He's absolutely right. But if the kind of deadlock that I think we're all talking about happens, and they try to impeach him, that could very likely re-elect Donald Trump in 2020.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You better be careful what you wish for, because you're going to enrage so many people. It is patently biased and partisan and mean-spirited. The thing is, Donald Trump, he's baked in the cake. We all know who he is. We know how he talks. We know when he's a braggart. We know when he's, a narcissist. We already know that. We got that in the campaign. We've got this 2 years of him in office. I get a thrill out of watching liberals cover him, okay? Because Alexander Christoforou and I have talked about his rallies, and I always kind of grin when he thinks, it's the greatest thing ever. He's like, well, not really, but it's okay. You can think that way, all right? It's not a lie. It's an embellishment, okay?
Yes.
And what the Democrats may do, victory may be a crushing defeat. And I'm going to make a prediction. If they're going to do what they do that I'm predicting, and they win the House, the Democratic Party will follow the steps of the Whig Party before the Civil War. It will self-destruct, because you're empowering the Antifa people, and you're empowering Bernies and all these other people moving further and further to the left. The Democratic Party will fracture big league.
All right, guys, we have a lot of questions on Russia. These are short ones. Peter, let's try to knock these out real quick. News wants to know what's Russians' take on mixed marriages.
In what you mean, ethnically?
Yeah, ethnically mixed marriages. Number 2, he wants to know what's the tech industry like in Russia, and number 3, he wants to know, why do you keep on inviting Richard Goodstein to cross?
Okay, I'm going to defend Richard Goodstein. He's a friend of mine, and he is a good balance on the program. I like to spar with him. Okay, sometimes you roll up the sleeves and you go at it. It's fair. What he does is fair. I call him the Battlestar Galactica of the Democratic Party. He knows their talking points. I want to hear them, and I want people to hear me react to them in my guests. So he's a positive foil. Get off of Richard's back, okay? He's actually a good person. Mixed marriages, yeah, they're all over the place. Okay, Alexander, I always say there's 136 different nationalities in Russia. I mean, everything's mixed here. All right, everything. So I mean, I guess the only thing you'd say mixed marriage would be like with Africans or something like that, which does happen also. Okay. Yeah. Russians don't see color. It's not part of their tradition. Unfortunately, there's some radical, racist, fascist, homegrown here. They take their America. Okay, they're in contact with American Nazis and fascists. They're trying to replicate those ideas here, and it gets zero acceptance. People go like, huh, what? There's that, when the Soviet Union broke up, there was a lot of criminality, and certain groups from the Caucasus were involved in that, and that was when you got a sense of what would be approaching racism, because they were seen as the Dagestanis and the Chechens. They do this and that kind of criminality. But I've lived here for 20 years. As far as race relations are concerned, compared to the West, they're very tranquil here. Right downstairs in my building here, there's a 24/7 little grocery. It's all women from Tajikistan. The wonderful ladies. They're all polite. They all speak Russian. They're all Muslim, and they always comment on my ties. They always ask me how my day was. Wonderful little ladies. Okay, they have their traditions, but it's not in opposition to the dominant traditions of Russia, and that's how Russia works. Okay, minorities respect the dominant culture and civilization and language, but you can practice your religion as you feel. You can speak your native language at home. If you speak your native language at large, no one's going to understand you. Okay, simply won't, and they won't even try. Speak Russian. Okay.
All right,
Tech industry.
You answered a super chat question,
Oh, okay.
which was from Michael, who wanted to know. He's learning Russian for his next trip in the summer, and he wanted to know. He says it's pretty hard. Yeah, it's hard.
Okay, as far as the tech industry is concerned, it's doing very, very well. Lots of money to be made. See, the good thing is the sanctions. You know, the West, particularly the United States, wants to cut Russia out of all these things. So Russia invents their own. Thank you. Import substitution. No problem. No problem with tech here.
Alexander, we got a question from Portuguese the Mighty. Why is the West leaning towards radical socialism?
Well, I'm not sure that it is. In fact,
I don't think it is.
Radical socialism. I mean, I think what we have in the West is something an awful lot more insidious, which is what Peter was talking about before, which is a very militant and very angry and very dangerous and very authoritarian center. By a center, I mean a center which supports what you might call socialism for the rich and capitalism
for the poor.
For the poor, in the sense that rich people seem to, when I say rich people, the rich corporations, rich businesses, bankers, those sorts of people seem to get a lot of breaks. But welfare systems that had been created after the Second World War, it seems to me, are being phased out. So at the same time, as we're getting all of that, we have this attempt to put a progressive gloss on all of this by taking an extremely libertarian, aggressively libertarian view on social questions. So I don't think that it is a question of radical socialism. I don't think we really yet come up with a proper definition of the kind of system that we have here. And I think that's partly intentional. I think the people who have power don't want us to give a expression to it, a definition to it. But radical socialism, no, I don't see it. Can I just go back, by the way, quickly to what Peter said about mixed marriages? I've met Black Russians. That's to say, people who are children of Black immigrants to Russia and Russians. And they have very positive views about Russia. One of them I found out had actually been elected to a local council seat somewhere. The point about them was, however, that they were Russians. They considered themselves very Russian as Black people.
Yeah, but the only time you come across racism in Russia is Russian liberals. No, they're racist. Okay? They are racist, and they're unapologetic about it too. Okay, it's because they want to be European, and all these other people hold us back. Okay, that's the only time I ever hear racism is from Russian liberals. If I can go back to the radical socialism issue, really, what's in play right here is the destruction of the middle classes. And this is why there are people that are saying we need a new distribution of wealth, okay? And this is why some kids are talking about radical socialism. They don't have Birkenstocks and cappuccinos in radical socialism, okay? I lived in a communist country. I traveled all through the Eastern Bloc in the 1980s. They don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be ways of dealing with income inequality, okay? And I think that's something that's very serious that needs to be talked about. And if it's not, then it will destroy what so many people covet is the capitalist system. There's some really burning issues here that need to be addressed. Also, with artificial intelligence, man, they're putting jobs out of business really. Look at Japan. Japan is a fascinating case study. Japan is a very insular, racially insular society. They don't take refugees. If they do, it's a real, and you can put the number on one hand, okay? And so to alleviate their declining population, they're just automating the entire country because they don't want to bring in workers. And so as the population gets older and older, it's machines and robots that will take over the workforce. That's how insular they feel about their sense of being and their race.
All right. Alexander, we're approaching 2 hours, so we'll take about 10 more minutes worth of questions.
Because my dogs need to go out soon.
Yeah, and we'll wind it down. Alexander, what do you think of what's going on in Sweden? The fact that they haven't formed the government yet.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, once again, we saw a swing to the right, to the populist right. It's always called the populist right, and we saw once again a resistance by some people to accepting the logic of all of that, and trying to keep things going as they were before. And we see all these feverish attempts by various parties to try and sort of find a way round it. And at the same time, you have all the various ambitions and disputes that people have there. I'm afraid, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this, not just in Sweden. We have the fundamental problem we have right across Europe is of a political class that won't go away, but at the same time doesn't have answers. So you get this kind of stasis.
You know, it's really fascinating. You know, I'm sick and tired of this term populist, okay?
Well,
because if there's anything populist in Western political culture right now, it's the establishment. Because what do populists do? They promise things that you can't have, okay? We're gonna have free healthcare, we're gonna have free education, we'll pay off student debt, okay? That's how a populist, that's not how a populist, a real populist is the political forces controlling the West, making promises of prosperity and security, and they can't deliver on either one. The real populists are in power right now. What we're looking at now is alternatives, and we don't have a political lexicon for it, but we will soon, because as Alexander Mercouris said, this ain't going away soon.
All right, Alexander, real quick, we'll take the last two questions. Real quick, do you think the U.S. will start a war with China and Russia before the petrodollar falls?
No, I don't think so, because I think that will be suicide. And I don't think the people in charge of the United States are suicidal types. But what I think we will see is growing escalation. We're going to see more sanctions rolled out, more tariffs rolled out, a cranking up of the information campaign, which has also already achieved insane levels, and more military build-ups and more pressure. I think that eventually this whole thing will pass, not because any sense of reality will drop in, but because it will crumble. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's economically sustainable. I don't think it's politically sustainable in the end. But I don't think we're going to see an outright war. I think that in the end, people will just step back from doing that.
Yeah, well, everybody's just watching the United States bury itself in debt. Okay, that's what everybody's watching. Okay, really. It's insane. The U.S. is destroying its own currency with this reckless behavior. We need a space force. For what? Okay, my goodness. Let me just. Oh,
well, you see, the point is, they have the option of coming to an agreement with the Russians and the Chinese on practically everything.
That's appeasement. That's Munich. That's Munich.
Exactly. Well, you see, if you put yourself
built into the ideology, it's built into the ideology.
Exactly. But as I said, in the end, it will crumble. I mean, it will crumble under its own weight because it's unsustainable. You cannot take on Russia and China at the same time in this way. I mean, it just can't be done.
Let's give the historical analogy. This is what's happening now is as if the United States in 1940 decided to go to war with Japan and Germany at the same time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's going to war with Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union at the same time. That's the historical analogy. And this is what they're doing. This is what they're doing.
Yes.
All right, let's wrap it up with the way we started. What do you guys think? Is bin Solomon on his way out?
He's in trouble.
Yes, Yes, he's in trouble. I mean, we go back to our first series of questions. I think he is in trouble. I think he's becoming an embarrassment to absolutely everybody. And I think he's got plenty of people in Saudi Arabia who don't like him and who'd like to see him out of the way. I mean, he was rounding them up and locking them up in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. How can they possibly like him? So, I mean, I think he is on his way out. How long it will take, how it will be done, that I don't know. Peter.
And remember, it is a Wahhabi regime. And he says he's going to take on the clerics. Really? Yeah. Really? Yeah. Okay. First of all, you extort billions and billions of dollars from this parasite class that the royal family created. And now you're going after the clerics. Okay. Yeah. Wow. That is the perfect storm for failure. And then you annoy most of the world by recklessly trying to destroy dissent. I mean, every single thing this guy has no Midas touch, none. Okay. He's annoyed way too many people. Look, I hear he's got a big yacht. I think it's in the Mediterranean. Go.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we will wrap it up there. Real quick, Peter, I saw a message earlier, and I'll just ask you your real quick take on it. I forgot the user's name. Would you ever invite Alex Jones for a 1-hour interview?
Sure. Why not? You know what my litmus test is? Is that my litmus test inviting someone is that they're part of a public conversation. It doesn't mean I would agree with them. As a matter of fact, I don't really agree with much what Alex Jones has to say. But I guess I'm just an old-fashioned British liberal. I'll fight for you to be able to say what you think, okay? I guess I'm just old-fashioned, out of touch. But I do believe in freedom of speech, including Alex Jones.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and Blizzard Veritas is saying that the dogs are barking, so they need to get taken out. And I think we will wrap it up there, guys. Thank you for everyone who attended this live chat. Thank you very much. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you for your support. If you've donated to us, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. If you've bought a shirt, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. If you haven't yet, go to the Duran shop, buy a shirt. It helps us out. Donate to our PayPal or Patreon. It helps us out. Peter, Alexander, any last words for our viewers on this live chat? Everyone was great today.
Absolutely. Everyone was great. And we look forward to seeing you and hearing from you all again.
And between now and next Sunday, tell at least 5 of your friends to watch, please. Okay?
Yeah, please spread the word about our channel. Tell people to subscribe. Tell people to hit that like button on our videos. That also helps us out a lot. You guys, for attending, thank you very much. Peter, Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow, thank you very much. And Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much. We hit 2 hours, over 550 viewers. Until next week, what do you say, guys? Next week again?
Next week again.
Next weekend.
All right, we'll see everybody next week. Look forward to hearing from everybody. Take care, everyone.